So question 1 states, the average salary among all players in the NFL this season was $2.1 million. John will take a random sample of 25 players, and Mike will take a random sample of 10 players. Who is more likely to select a sample with a mean salary that is within $0.2 million of the population mean? So what we want to remember is that accuracy increases the larger and larger sample that you take. What we mean by accuracy is that the standard error will shrink. So typically, the person who takes the larger sample is the one who's more likely to be close to the population mean. So the person who took the larger sample was John, so John is the one who's most likely to be closer to the population mean. 2 says, which of the following p-values gives the strongest evidence against the null hypothesis? So when we want strong evidence, that means we want a smaller p-value. The smaller the p-value, the more unusual our particular sample is. The more unusual it is, the less likely we believe that the null hypothesis is true, so it's going to be more convincing and have stronger evidence against it. So the smallest p-value up here would be B. 3 says, which of the following levels of significance will require the weakest evidence? So our significance level is just basically telling us how much evidence, how much different does the sample need from the population to convince us that we believe the null hypothesis is wrong. The larger and larger the significance level, the weaker and weaker evidence that we need. So the significance level up here, that's the largest, is 95%, because all we want to reject the null hypothesis is for our p-value to be less than the significance level. The bigger we make the significance level, the more easier it is to have a p-value less than it. 4 says, a study evaluated the impact on a 10-minute seated yoga program added to standard comprehensive diabetes care on blood sugar. A hypothesis test was used to determine if the average blood sugar is lower in diabetic patients who had a 10-minute seated yoga program to their standard comprehensive care. The result of the test was not statistically significant. So you want to remember what it means to be not statistically significant is that the difference between what we saw in our sample and what we expect to see in our null hypothesis wasn't all that different. So what they saw could happen if the null hypothesis was true. So this tells us that they did not reject the null hypothesis. So the 2 that basically say they didn't reject the null hypothesis is B, because it says the study did not give strong evidence, and D, which says that the study gave strong evidence that the average blood sugar is the same in diabetic patients treated with the 10-seated yoga program compared to their standard comprehensive care. What you want to remember is that we're never giving strong evidence in favor of the null hypothesis. So this last part is saying HO is true, which we're never proving. We're never finding evidence for the null hypothesis. We're just trying to prove it wrong. So the only correct answer then would be B. At least that we don't have enough evidence to necessarily say the null hypothesis is incorrect. 5 says, Jane wants to estimate the average number of minutes spent studying per week among all UVM students, and the key here is that she wants to know about all UVM students. However, what she does is she randomly selects 4 nights and will go to the library on those nights and ask the students she finds there. So the issue, if she goes to the library, she's leaving out students who don't go to the library. So she's not really getting a random sample of all UVM students. So if she doesn't get a random sample of UVM students, she can't really generalize her results back to the population. So A, B, and C want to try to generalize the results of her confidence interval to make a statement about how much studying all UVM students do. But since she only took a random sample of students that attend the library, she can't really make a statement about all UVM students. If she actually did take a random sample, then the correct answer would be B. But since it's not a random sample, we can't state that that one's the correct one.